Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session on intentions and success. I think it's going to be a great session. We've had one speaker not able to come, and so we've got a bit of extra time, so we're going to have most of the questions and answers at the end, so we can try and start a bit of a conversation around the topic. But our first speaker is going to be talking to us online via video conferencing because she was not able at the end to come here physically. So let me introduce Maartje Henderikx from OUNL Netherlands, and she's going to talk on to change or not to change. That's the question on Mooc success, barriers and their implications. Thank you. Maartje.
Hi. Good afternoon. Can you hear me all? Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Not physically yet online, but it sort of suits Moocs, I suppose. Well, indeed, I am Maartje Henderikx. I am a PhD student from the Open University of the Netherlands. And in the next 10 minutes, I will tell you about an alternative way of looking at success and what can get in the way of this success. I'll show you some results from Moocs we analyzed. In mind when analyzing Mooc data and considering design alterations. However, I will not offer specific redesign advice or design actions that should or should not be taken. So, well, generally, Mooc success is measured by the number of certificates issued. And basically, this is the same as is done in traditional education, where diplomas stand for success. But as Tinto, who did extensive research on dropout in education, already recognized all the way back in 1973, the perspective of the individual should also be taken into account when it comes to looking at educational success. So we propose an alternative approach for success measurement based on individual intentions of Mooc takers. But then what would be a valid model for intention measurement in Moocs? The recent action approach by Fishbein and Isaac serves as a framework to our study, and more specifically the intention behavior gap. As you can see here, where the arrows. This framework is basically centered around the formation of an intention and the translation of this intention into actual behavior. And Sheeran, he specified 4 different intention behavior patterns. You have, as you can see here, the inclined actors. These are people who intend to act and actually do act as intended. You also have the inclined abstainer. You have the disinclined actor. They don't intend to act on something, but act anyway. And the last group is the disinclined abstainers, and they don't intend to act and indeed don't act. And this last group is not included in our model because they would never start a Mooc in the first place. So we translated or visualized, as you wish, these intention behavior patterns to Mooc context in these Venn diagrams that you can see. And the big oval represents basically the Mooc, covering themes and topics, all different themes and topics. You have the small light gray dots. They represent all possible intentions a Mooc taker could have in the Mooc. And you have the dark gray circle. This is the initial intention of a Mooc taker. And the red dotted circle you see here is the actual behavior. And as you can see, an inclined actor, you can see the intention, the dark gray circle, and the red dotted circle are aligned. So this person, this Mooc taker, did as intended to do. Then you see the disinclined actor all the way to the right, I think it is, yes. This person did more than intended. The red dotted circle is bigger and includes other intentions. And these two are considered successful from our perspective, people who do as intended or do more than intended. And the middle one, the inclined abstainer, as you can see, did less than intended. And we consider this disinclined actor, the abstainer as unsuccessful. But according to, well, predictor for behavior, hence the intention behavior gap. So this intention behavior gap can be caused by many different barriers that Mooc takers encounter. And these barriers can be either Mooc related or non-Mooc related. And as you can see here, we did a first explorative literature review on barriers encountered by students in Moocs and also in online learning in general. And this produced a really long list. And we categorized these barriers as either Mooc related or non-Mooc related and into further subcategories. As you can see here, typical Mooc related barriers are lack of interaction, lack of useful feedback, lack of support, and for non-Mooc related, a big one is workplace issues, family issues, lack of academic knowledge of background, barriers like that. So we analyzed two Moocs. One Mooc was a Spanish Mooc actually on business intelligence and big data. And the other Mooc was a Dutch Mooc on the adolescent brain. And we collected data in these Moocs, and the intention behavior items that we constructed were fitted to the design of the respective Mooc. And they were asked in the pre and post questionnaire. These were questions like, what do you intend to do? Or I want to finish the whole Mooc, I want the certificate. And the same question was asked in the post questionnaire. And then we match the pre and the post and see what attention indeed was equal to behavior. And the barrier items were constructed based on the literature review, as I explained before, and were only asked in the post questionnaire. And then the pre questionnaire was issued in one, and the post questionnaire at the end of the last Mooc week. And we used the data of the Dutch adolescent brain Mooc to compare the two different measurement approaches, the current perspective or more certificate-oriented perspective, and our alternative approach, the intention perspective. And as you can see here, when you look at the current use perspective, only 5.5% would be considered as successful. When you look at the other approach, the more Mooc taker friendly approach, then you can see that of 101 matched pre and post participants, 49% of these were inclined actors. These people did as they intended to do when they started to move. And 21% can be regarded as disinclined actors. And this group did actually more than they intended to do. So if you add this up, you have a 70% of successful Mooc takers, if you look at it like this. Further, but of course, these Mooc takers are also encountered barriers during the runtime of the Mooc. And we analyzed the barrier data of both Moocs, from the big data Mooc and from the adolescent brain Mooc. And we clustered these encountered barriers by category. And as you can see here in the figures, the most encountered barriers are non-Mooc related barriers. Mostly general areas like workplace issues, personal and technical, only a few. And the Mooc related barriers are design and expectation management related. So this is the top 5 of encountered barriers by Mooc takers in these respective Moocs, and you can see that it's quite similar, basically. And the one with the red mark in front of them are the Mooc related barriers. So most of the barriers, the biggest ones, lack of time and workplace issues, are non-MOOC related. And this is valuable and also useful information when you assess a MOOC after its runtime and think about possible redesign interventions. So, in conclusion, high dropout, or basically a low percentage of certificates issued, does not necessarily mean that a MOOC was not successful or that MOOC takers did not do what they wanted to do with this MOOC. And reason for the attention behavior gap, not being able to translate your initial intention into actual behavior, can be MOOC related or non-MOOC related. And insight in these issues is valuable for MOOC assessment purposes and decision-making purposes regarding the redesign of a MOOC. But of course, there are also limitations. You might think that maybe prompting students to recognize and share their study intentions may serve to predispose them to follow through. Of course, this is a first explorative study and the samples are relatively small. There's also a survival bias, probably influencing the analysis, which means as much as that MOOC takers who survive until the end of the MOOC are the ones who participate in both questionnaires. And these are often the more successful MOOC takers. And MOOC takers who drop along the way are often not the ones who indeed fill in the post-questionnaire. So this is definitely something that we should try to bypass in future. And there's also a difference in weight of or effort of the intention, which means as much as if a MOOC taker, let's say, only has the intention to browse or download or finish one module, this of course, and actually does so, this of course takes a lot less effort than it does when you have the intention to finish 5 modules or get a certificate and indeed do so. So this is definitely, these are definitely issues that should be taken into account. Well, thank you very much. And well, if you have any questions, please let me know.
So do we have some questions? We're going to try and handle questions for Maartje online.
Yeah.
Anybody?
I have a question.
Yes,
So
Monika
has a question. Hi, Maartje. So I have a follow-up question. You mentioned that the second most important reason was workplace issues, and my question is, like, did you try to disentangle what kind of workplace issues were going on? Like, what exactly, what factors, you know, constituted workplace issues?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question. No, we did not dive deeper into the specific barriers. There was, however, one other workplace-related question in the barriers, and that was lack of support of the workplace. But that is actually one of the barriers that are not one of the main barriers. It's workplace issues in general, but I suppose indeed that it makes sense to look into that issue, because what are indeed the specific workplace issues? Yes, but we didn't do that at this time.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Maartje, did you get any insight into what were the factors that allowed people like the disinclined actors to change their mind and become more engaged than they had intended? No, also not. I think this is really a first explorative study to see if it indeed our way of, well, basically the new approach that we propose, basically, and barriers encountered by students, if that indeed brings any results. And indeed a next step would be to dive deeper into these issues to see what indeed did certain people to be able to follow up on their intention, because that would be really valuable information. Yes, I agree. Any more questions? We might close it there. Thank you very much for presenting online for us, Maartje.
Thank you very much for getting the chance to do so. Thank you.
So now we have Monika Hamori from the IE Business School in Madrid. And she's going to be talking about the drivers of employer support for professional skill development in Moocs.
Thank you very much. So I probably have a very unusual background in this crowd. I'm a business school professor in management, and my academic research focuses on employment issues and career development issues, career management issues. And this particular piece of research, I'm looking at why employers would provide support for Moocs. So formal training, skill development is extremely important in organizations, and we have known this for a very long time. There are dozens of studies that show how it increases job performance, job-related knowledge, and indirectly organizational financial performance. But we also know that, at least in some countries like the United States, the percentage of workers who receive formal training actually dramatically declined. So the study that I have here looks at a representative sample of US employers, and it finds that the incidence of training declined by 28% between 2001 and 2009. And actually that decline is not dictated by economic cycles or by the financial crisis. But we also know that Moocs started out, well, in computer science disciplines, but they are increasingly shifting towards business and management topics, right? Business and management topics currently constitute, for example, 20% of the course offering, one of the largest chunks of the course offerings on Coursera. So it's reasonable to expect, right, that Moocs may offer a substitute for organizations. They may actually help organizations close their training gaps. And this is what I'm trying to look at. Very curiously, and despite the fact that business Moocs and management Moocs and professional Moocs are increasingly become dominant on Mooc platforms, there has been very surprisingly very little research on how Moocs may help corporate development or actually influence labor market success. And we really have 10, 20 studies on this, and much of the work is conceptual and not empirical. So what are some of the major conclusions from the empirical research out there? Well, we know that working professionals actually make up the majority of Mooc participants out there, irrespective of, this is a general Mooc offering. We also know that when they engage in Moocs, the acquisition of job-related skills is a primary motivation for them to enroll in these Moocs. Job-related skill acquisition is very important, although there is a quantitative study that shows that even if they engage in Moocs to acquire professional development skills, often this doesn't happen. They actually fail to relate the course content to their job role or work tasks when they get back to work. So this is the research on employed learners, and another bit of literature explored, what employers think of Moocs. And one of the major findings were that overall, employers seem pretty optimistic and seem pretty supportive of Moocs. 20 interviews by Welton Radford and her colleagues showed that the perceived benefits include the breadth of course offering and the low costs. Interviews by 8 managers by Olson find that human resource managers are actually not averse to sending their employees to open courses where employees may share company-related information. And the survey by Welton Radford shows that actually 83% of employers are positive, report positive views on using Moocs as a professional development tool, so positive views. Now, what happens when they actually use these tools, the very same study shows that despite their optimism, actually, this is an older study, we have to acknowledge that 2014, so the incidence of Moocs in corporations may have increased since then, but a very small percentage actually uses Moocs for professional development. Study published last year in the Emoocs conference proceedings shows that most employers are actually unaware of employees taking Moocs, but when they are aware, the majority of them actually supports Moocs, even though this support is more of a moral, informal type of a support and not a financial support or time off. And this very same paper finds that informal support, encouragement by the direct boss, for example, helps course completion, but strangely, time off and financial support, cost reimbursement didn't have an effect. So if you take a look at this very small literature, maybe it's fair to conclude that there is still very fragmented evidence out there on how Moocs are used for corporate skill development. And much of this evidence is descriptive. So most of these papers actually convey very basic descriptive statistics like means or group means, but except for this one paper, none of the papers are actually looking at the drivers, the predictors of certain phenomenon. Well, arguably one of the most important phenomenon is employer support for Moocs. This is what I'm looking at in this paper. I'm looking at all types of support in a general sense, and then I'm also breaking down support to 3 categories. One of them is financial support, right, cost reimbursement. Another one is time off. In human resource management, we call these types of practices rewards. And I'm also looking at Moocs being included in performance evaluation, and that practice has a very different type of flavor. This is expectation enhancing practice, the organization kind of outlining required behaviors at the workplace. And I'm interested in finding out the job-related, the employer-related, and also the organizational-related drivers of employer support. In management, we normally start off by posing hypotheses. And in constructing my hypotheses, I'm actually relying on a theory that in our field has been the most commonly used theory to decide, to inform why employers may invest in training practices. But I have to acknowledge that all of this literature, this is like a literature that goes back 40, 50 years, right, looks at formal in-company training practices, and none of this was applied to Moocs. In constructing my hypotheses, I'm actually building on the basic differences between formal training courses and Moocs. So one of these differences is who attends these training courses and who attends these training courses and what kind of training courses are supported. In the case of formal training courses, the relevance of the course content to the actual job content was never an issue. It was assumed to be the case. Actually, in this literature, human resource managers did all sorts of person, task, and organizational analyses, right, to make sure that there is training relevance to the job content. As we all know, the course content is not always relevant for Mooc learners, or it is relevant to a different extent. Moocs have no barriers to join, anybody can join them, and also there are probably hundreds of business courses out there, so employees have a wide range of choices to make, and their choices may be directly or actually much less directly related to their job content. So I argue that relevance will matter. Relevance can be explicit or objective relevance, such as an explicit match between the course topic, these are all marketing courses that I'm looking at, and the job function, the type of job that this person is doing, that's a marketing job, or relevance can be perceived relevance. Formal training and Moocs also differ hugely in training delivery, as we all know. In formal in-company training session, all the participants are observed and they have an instructor who guides them, right? And they can interact synchronously with that instructor. Moocs require a lot of self-directed learning. So some studies show that the type of learners that benefit the most for this huge degree of learner control are actually the learners who are high on academic abilities and have higher experience in a work domain. So this is what I'm looking at first, whether academic degrees or experience in a work domain measured by somebody's hierarchical position in an organization actually predicts support. And we also know that formal training and Moocs differ widely in the type of investment, financial investment that they require. In company, formal training sessions actually require a huge financial investment up front, and normally the unit costs of training an employee are greater. We know that Moocs don't require an upfront investment from corporations, and the unit costs tend to be very low. In fact, it's granting employees time off rather than financial reimbursement that may be the most that may have the highest costs for Moocs. So I'm hypothesizing that small-sized employers may be the most likely to turn to Moocs, and employers that didn't have resources to devote to formal training sessions in the past, they don't have the resources, right? These will be the employers that will turn to Moocs. I'm testing these hypotheses by looking at almost 2,500 learners who were taking 40 Moocs. I'm actually only selecting Moocs in the field of marketing. These Moocs were offered on very different marketing topics, such as pricing, channel management, or brand management, for example. You know, the underlying theme behind these Moocs is that normally people don't take these Moocs as a hobby, as fun. This is not philosophy, right? But most of these courses are actually aimed at increasing professional development. About 1,500 of these learners are employed either full-time or part-time, and I'm looking at this group of employees for my analyses. Let me start by descriptive statistics. The incidence of employer support is actually quite low in my sample. Time off is the most common. 8% of employers provide that. Financial support is offered to 5% of the employed learners. 4% of the employed learners have Moocs in their performance evaluation. And 2% of learners said that their employer required them to attend the Moocs. So this is what I do in these analyses. This is very overwhelming at first, but and don't worry, this table just shows the logic behind these analyses, and then I will highlight the results. So what this table shows is that I'm looking at 4 types of outcomes, right? General support, and then the 3 types of outcomes: financial support, time off, and Moocs in the performance evaluations. So the dependent variables in these models are different, but the predictors are exactly the same. I'm using binary logistic regressions because it not only reports the coefficients, but it also gives me the odds ratios of these analyses. Much nicer, no? So topic choice, relevance, right? Relevance indeed matters. For example, in terms for general support, perceived relevance has a positive relationship with general support. And I also find that when employees claim that they want to use this knowledge for their current organization to improve their career in their current organization, they are more likely to receive support. When they want to use this content outside the organization, that coefficient is negative. They are less likely to receive support. However, the different types of support show very different relationships with relevance. For financial support, it is actually explicit, objective relevance that matters and not perceived relevance. So if you are a marketing specialist, you will get financial support for these courses. If you are not in marketing, then your chances of getting that support actually decline. For time off and performance evaluations, non-financial support, actually perceived relevance seems to be more important. Second hypothesis actually looked at that idea behind learner control, that people with more advanced academic degrees and people who have more work-related experience in a domain are more likely to receive support. I don't think that story works at all. If you take a look at educational degrees, for example, here the bachelor's degree, that was the most common degree among learners, is the omitted category. If you don't have a degree, actually that relationship is not significant. You are not less likely to get support. And if you have a more advanced degree than a bachelor's degree, you are not at all more likely to get support. In fact, it is exactly the opposite. If you have a professional degree, and most commonly this is a business degree, you are less likely to get support from your employer. And if you take a look at the different types of support, professional degree, is consistently significant and negative in all of these models. Now, what about hierarchical position in the organization? Well, we do have some support that executives are more likely to be supported, but it's probably not because they have greater learner control. If you take a look at these coefficients, managers and executives, are the most significant predictors of financial support. So your hierarchical position really matters for financial support, but it doesn't seem to matter for the non-financial types of support, right? And this is really interesting because time off may be a type of support that would require the greatest learner control. If you are financially supporting an employer, let's say giving them a course certificate, probably that course certificate acts as a control mechanism. With time off, you don't have the certificate as a control mechanism, so learner support would be especially important there. Finally, in terms of the type of organizations that support Moocs, yes, small-sized organizations are more likely to jump into this, and they are extremely likely to do it with time off. And large-sized organizations are less likely to provide Moocs, maybe because they already have their own e-learning systems and their own development practices in place. And lastly, I took a look at the existing training intensity in organizations, and I measured that by asking employees, how many hours of formal training did you receive in the past 12 months? And the hypothesis was that employees that didn't have the resources to invest in their employers that didn't have the resources to invest in their employees, so employees who received fewer hours of formal training, are actually more likely to be supported in Moocs. This is not at all what happens. If you take a look at these coefficients, actually hours of training, and the omitted category here is 0 hours of training. So all hours of training is actually positively and significantly related to support, and it's pretty consistent across the types of support. So what does that mean? It means that it is the organizations that already invested in training development, it is the training-focused organizations that are actually the most likely to invest in Moocs again. Invest in Moocs. And if you take a look at the odds ratios are pretty big there. So if you, for example, for the category of organizations that provided more than 50 hours of training, the odds ratio says that they are almost 5 times more likely to support Moocs as an organization that provides 0 hours of formal training to their employees. So what do we conclude from this? Maybe one of the things, one of the takeaways from this is that employers are still not leveraging Moocs based on the descriptive statistics, and especially those employees who didn't invest in training in the past. So the hope that Moocs will help organizations with the least resources is actually not being realized. And when they do support Moocs, when you compare the 3 types of support, financial, time off, and performance evaluations, I see no rationale behind the predictors of support. For Moocs, time off actually requires probably is the most expensive time of investment, right? Much more expensive than financial support. However, financial support is still decided based on very, very traditional criteria, such as employees' hierarchical level, job function match, or even in one analysis, full-time versus part-time status. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Monika. We're going to hold questions until the end. So now we have Rémi Bachelet from Ecole, Centrale, Lille, France, and he's going to talk about towards a topology of Mooc activity patterns, learners who never rest. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. The paper, yeah. The paper I am going to present is not a research paper, it's an experience paper. So it's a bit simpler, and it was intended to be shorter, even if we have some spare time today, which is really fine. So what is it about? I'm going to present you our study on Mooc activity patterns. When do Mooc learners work? Do they have specific rhythm within the day or within the week? Do they sleep? No, oh, sorry, that's the question. Up here is okay. And do they sleep? The sub-question was do they ever rest? So what did we do? We worked on. We thought about the different factors that will influence learners' activity patterns, like their personal schedule, their working hours. Don't forget that most Mooc attendees are actually professionals. Nighttime, sleeping. Is there a relationship with the activity we organize on the Mooc? Most noticeably paper deadlines and live sessions. So the question is here, what kind of activity pattern do we have in the Mooc? So let's present our data. So two research questions. So how do Mooc learners manage their connection schedules, and does the Mooc determine the connection rhythm, or is it rather the opposite? Mooc are supposed to leave a lot of freedom to learners. So what about it? So I'll be proposing two best practices for Mooc design at the end of this presentation. Our data set consists in 4 sessions. So it's sessions 5, 6, 7, and 8, approximately 5,000 to 8,000 active learners. We didn't use platform stats, but aggregated server stats. So noticeably, this is Google Analytics. So we do not have a typology of learners because this is just aggregated server stats. So it's a clear limitation to the study. We also used YouTube stats. Especially, we analyzed how many people were watching the live session live and how many were watching the live session after the session. Different views. First, let's have a general look at the data. So just to see what it is about. Here are the hourly connection patterns. So you see that when you take all these data, which is something like 15,000 to 20,000 learners, the pattern is quite stable. Okay, with a peak somewhere that we're going to see later. And you see there is essay submission for those following the advanced track. And there is the live session, but we're going to see that in more details. The first interesting thing we can see is that actually it doesn't appear when we look at the raw data, but if you try to calculate the connection density, which is the number of connection per hour, the activity is much bigger on evenings, okay, approximately double the normal activity. The second thing is that learners do sleep, so we do have a clear reduction of activity at night. Now, we try to establish a typology of activity patterns. So we have 4 types of days which actually look alike. So the first day is the typical weekday. So this is a normal day, nothing special. So this is a weekday or a Saturday. Then we have a special day, which is the first day of the week, Monday. This is the day on which we publish new content. And there is, especially, we will see it if we process the data a little bit. At noon, the new content becomes available, and people work more on that day. Then you have the Q&A session day. So every Wednesday, Friday, it's on Tuesday. Every Tuesday, we have a live session. So it's at 9:30, and we answer a question, we give information about the course, we present options, we talk about preparing the exams, and you see there, these days are a bit special. And then there is the essay submission day, and as one would expect, there is a little bit of a rush at the end of the day to connect and submit the papers. So the study number 4 is the most interesting one. We aggregated all the data using our typology of days. And there is a clear pattern. So you see there is the 9 p.m. effect. So between 9 and 10 p.m., we do have a surge of activity. This surge of activity is weaker on normal day. You see, this is much stronger on the day we have the live session, even if the live session does take place on YouTube, not on the platform. And the other days, whether the launch days and the submission days, we still have this 9 p.m. effect. So this is pretty interesting. So what about the conclusion? First thing, a lot of things happen on evenings. So don't forget about that, even if the teacher work schedule is often during the day, our learners are working during the evenings. There are 4 typical types of days. So launch day, live day, weekdays and Saturday, and essay submission days. Another thing which I didn't show in the slide because I had 10 minutes was about are live session useful? So we were able to analyze retention, live session retention. And we have 5 live sessions, okay? And of course, as we advance in the Mooc, there are less and less attendees watching the live sessions. But what we see is that the live views are stable, but the deferred views, those who watch the live sessions after, on the day after, really go down. So there are 2 types of learners. Those who want to watch the live session, that we call hardcore learners, and we have a very high retention rate for them. And then there are the normal learners, and the attrition is stronger. And the last thing is the famous 9 p.m. effect that we seem to observe every day but Saturdays. So what about best practices for Mooc design? So live sessions seems to us to be extremely important, because the more people you can drag into the first live session, the less attrition you have. So if you have a Q&A live session, be very careful to have a successful session number 1, because that's the session in which you will get your public. The second thing is there is a preferential time slot. So in general, for live event or sending announcements or news, the best time slot seems to be 9 to 10. So you would want to send announcement a little before that time, for example. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Rémi. So let's open up for questions on both the presentations and just the general topic of student intention and success.
I have a question for the last gentleman from Lille, France. Sorry, for the last presentations. I'm curious, like I know like your research is based on your analytic and you have live sessions and obviously you release content. You don't show the Mooc transparent on every module, so you release content every week or something. Do you have some, did you do a study or some recommendation? Like example, my Mooc, I just launched a new one went last week in Canada, but I have like everybody else, learners from all around the world, and I mean, I don't release content on a weekly basis, so they can go through the different modules if they can, like they can do it like in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So for me, the 9-10 will work in a Canadian or a North American zone, and I don't do live sessions. So do you think like your conclusion on your data will work also for the Moocs who are not on the release basis?
Well, our data doesn't allow us to answer that question. We worked on the time zone of Europe and West Africa. We were very careful to filter our data so that we have the same time zone. But we have very few learners on the American time zones, so
okay.
I cannot tell.
So that helped me understand a little bit of your research framework. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I guess you could quite easily replicate this study. So it's using Google Analytics is extremely easy.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Rémi, does Google Analytics allow you to time shift the individual users to their time zone, or is it?
Google Analytics was our main tool for this study. So Google Analytics is extremely simple. It's quite respective of user privacy. So you are not really able to reconcile this data with other data. So this is aggregated, which is a bit frustrating, I guess. We did filter out the time zones because Google Analytics give you the ability to set up a series of filters. So we took only, for most of our data, we were extremely careful with the time zones. So we could select and filter out other time zones, but that's other countries, other cultures. So validity is really limited to French-speaking Europe.
Okay. Have we got another question up the back there? Yes.
Hello. I have two questions for Monika. The first thing is about what about the Mooc certification? Because in your presentation, I didn't read, I think, about certification. So do the managers consider training in Moocs by having, at the end, a certificate?
So would they be more likely to support Moocs if a certificate is earned?
Yeah, for example, I saw that some of the employees can, for example, train for like 1 to 10 hours. But you can see that also like a Mooc sometimes needs, of course, 20 or 30 hours. So what about that? Is it only like training for 1 week or 2 weeks, or do they support, for example, completing a Mooc?
Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, the 110 and 1020 hours, those dummies actually referred not to Mooc activity, but the amount of hours of formal non-Mooc training that employees received in the past 12 months. So the relationship there is that employees who received more training, more formal training, are actually more likely to be supported for the Mooc as well. So it's the kind of the training and development prone organizations that are also the ones that are the most likely to support Moocs. So it has nothing to do with hours of investment in the Moocs. So certificate here is, so I didn't look at certificate, right? I have that data, but I didn't include it as a predictor of support. So I think that's actually a very good suggestion.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And my second question for Rémi. I also did an analysis on one of the Moocs in Austria, and I found that the peak time was at 10 p.m. And most of the reads and forums were around 9 to 10 p.m. And in the daytime, maybe the people are working or at schools or whatever, but I think they investigate most of their time maybe when they go home and look at the Moocs and the forums. So I think I also confirm your findings in Austria. Yeah.
This is very interesting. Just remember that the next step would be to have a typology of learners and to adapt to different type of learners, of course. But it's very interesting.
I think there was one over this side.
I have a question for Rémi. In terms of the, you have many different activities in the Gestion de Projet Mooc, and I was wondering if you had any information on specific pages that the learners were going to, and if there were certain types of activities that they did at certain hours outside of the question and answer session.
I'm sorry, I can't tell. We would need to use raw server data. We do have other research going on, but right now this one with Google Analytics, we could do something more with Google Analytics because you have stats on the pages. The problem we would have is that the pages is different every week, so we would need a bit of work because, for example, the announcement page is the announcement page varies. So you see, each time you send an announcement, something different happens. And a very big problem you have when you process Mooc data is that you have some kind of a butterfly effect. If you have your announcement and you send your announcement at 10 in the morning or at in the middle of the afternoon, things will happen very differently. And if you do a mistake in your announcement, it's gonna burn on the forum. So it's actually Mooc data is extremely difficult to handle. It's not physical. It's crowd data. So you need to be extremely careful with these.
And down in front.
Hello, I'm Nicolas Senekiev from IMT in France, and thank you both for the great talks. My question is for Monika. Monika, your results are struck me because we're all pushing ourselves to transform our institutions because of digital. And what you're saying is that employers are also using the former frame of thought to make decisions. Mm-hmm. So from your results, could you give us insights on what we could do or what we could tell them to create other frames of thought?
So, advice on how to deal with employers. I'm already giving a preview of what I'm going to talk about in the business section after lunch. So I not only crunched these data, but I also conducted 74 interviews with these Mooc learners. And it's really striking. So this is from the learner perspective. So if you would talk to employers, probably you would get a much more optimistic picture, very keen employers, right, ready to support Moocs. If you talk to the learners, this picture is very different. So what really struck me, how independently these employed learners are studying and working in Moocs, for the most part without employer support. And then I looked at the organizations that actually adopted these Moocs, and I asked learners, now, how did your organization actually, why do they provide support for these Moocs? And it turns out that it was never the human resource manager or the L&D, the learning and development professionals initiative, right? They are completely clueless about Moocs, the HR people. So how Moocs came to the organizations, it was always through proactive, learning-oriented individuals, a single individual or a learning-oriented team leader who actually learned from the Moocs, well, not from his or her HR manager, but through non-organizational channels, normally getting acquainted with the Mooc at a university or through friends, and bringing Moocs to the organization to be pioneered inside the organization. So what kind of advice can I give? Like, probably don't approach the HRM or the L&D professionals in an organization. They are probably not the best people to approach with this. Could be one of the advices.
I think we need a Mooc for HR people on using Moocs. I know from our institution that I've been approached by many academics that are saying that their corporate partners, people, corporate entities that support their research and so forth, are approaching them and asking them to create online learning for specific things that are that the employers are finding, a skill shortage. So the fact that they're coming to universities for this sort of professional education versus, other more commercial professional education suppliers, I think is a really positive thing and gives us lots of opportunities. In your conversation, did you talk to these companies? I suppose you surveyed them and interviewed them as well?
So I didn't get to talk to companies per se. So this is not the company perspective.
All right.
So I got to talk to these people because they participated in our Moocs, right? So they had the learner perspective. Some of these, a minority, were these enthusiastic team leaders who then, kind of disseminated the Mooc in their team, in their business unit, and kind of got their subordinates to participate. But it's not the organizational perspective, really. It's not the HRM perspective.
Yeah.
I didn't get to talk to
obviously your next study, or one of them.
Well,
Any more questions up there? Yes.
Monika, your presentation is one of the most clear and well-articulated research I've seen in this conference so far. Thank you. You mentioned relatedness and perceived relatedness between course content and employees' role. How did you differentiate these two different measures?
Okay, so the explicit relatedness would be, do you work in the job function in which this Mooc is provided? This was an easy operationalization in this case because all the Moocs that I was looking at, 14 of them, actually they were all provided, they were all offered in the field of marketing. So a match is everybody who is a marketing professional is a match. I think 40% of the sample was marketing professionals. It's really also very interesting who are the rest of the 60%, right? And HR professionals were less than 1% of the sample, but IT managers, operations professionals, R&D professionals, software engineers actually took marketing courses. Why? Because it may be only 20% of their job content. They are developing software, but this type of knowledge is essential for their job. Perceived relevance was just measured by one question. And I think it was like, how relevant is the course content to your job content? And that was a 1 to 5 Likert type scale.
Did you use social demographics as predictive variables in the research?
Say that again, sorry.
Did you use social demographics?
Social demographics,
predictive
yes. So I have gender in there. I didn't, so I have it as a, I actually have a control variables that I didn't spend a lot of time on. So I have age in various categories. I have gender. Because this was a very international crowd, so I'm looking, and many of these courses were offered either in English or Spanish, so I'm asking them, how fluent are you in the Mooc language, right? How many Moocs have you done in the past? Different countries, so I'm controlling for GDP per capita, because poor countries may be less likely to do financial support for Moocs, for example. I also have work experience data, some career history data that I didn't control for, but could be, and at the educational level. So these are the socio-demographics that I'm controlling for.
All right, that answers my question. Thank you.
All right.
Any more questions? Okay, well, we might close it there and gain ourselves 20 minutes to get a jump on lunch. Thank you very much for attending.